Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the distinguished gentleman from California for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The rule before us today provides for consideration of 3 pieces of legislation that are, once again, missed opportunities to provide real relief to the American people. Rather than working with Republicans to address the serious issues facing our nation, Democrats again prioritize the interest of far-left special interest groups in their radical progressive base over the needs of American workers and American families. Look no further than H.R. 2543, a compilation of 13 financial services bills that prioritize woke policies and unnecessary reporting over actually fixing Biden's economic crisis. As my friends across the aisle will remember, under President Trump, U.S. employment reached a 50-year low of 3.5%. Additionally, under President Trump, minority unemployment dropped to the lowest levels on record. Compare that with the economy under the Democrats' one-party rule. Inflation is now at a 40-year high. Gas prices are now over $5 a gallon. And Americans can expect to pay an extra $5,200 this year compared to last year for the same goods and services. So once again, rather than just working with Republicans to provide real economic relief, the Democrats continue to double down on reckless spending, far-left policies, and have prioritized their big government socialism over free market principles. And what has this led to? It's led to economic instability. It threatens the stability of our Federal Reserve. It piles regulatory costs on small businesses, and it emboldens unelected and unaccountable career bureaucrats. Ultimately, H.R. 2543 will make it more difficult for low-income and minority borrowers to start a business, to buy a home, and to build credit. It actually does the opposite of the intended effect. This rule also provides for consideration of H.R. 7606, a bill that claims to lower food costs by appointing and I quote, special investigator. And this special investigator will investigate American meat packers and live poultry dealers. This legislation, let's just be clear, this legislation is a weak attempt to lay the blame for President Biden's economic crisis on American job creators. In reality, this is just another unfunded mandate that empowers Washington bureaucrats and places new burdens on American food producers. Alarmingly, these compliant costs may actually rise the price of food even higher, making life in Joe Biden's America even harder on average American families. Finally, this bill provides for consideration of H.R. 2773, the Recovering America's Wildlife Act of 2022. While I support conservation efforts, I'm incredibly disappointed once again by the majority walking away from talks with Republicans to find offsets and to try to resolve spending concerns for the $1.34 billion in new annual mandatory spending authorized by this bill. In fact, the CBO, according to the CBO, this legislation spends $12.7 billion just in the first 10 years alone. Madam Speaker, 80% of Americans say inflation is the most important issue facing this country. But you wouldn't know it by looking at the bills Democrats are prioritizing for floor action this week. Perhaps it's time that my big government Democratic colleagues actually listen to the American people and work with Republicans on real economic solutions, rather than doubling down on out-of-control spending and reckless, far-left policies that created Biden's economic crisis in the first place. I strongly urge my colleagues to vote no to oppose this rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California.
I just want to, always as we have these debates with my good friend from Pennsylvania, encourage that we do work together, acknowledging that we have differences of opinion, and remind people maybe watching we are in a global economy that has inflation globally. And what we are doing in this package is to try to provide some small instruments for oversight and accountability so that we can have control, as much control as we can, in a global economy that is impacting this inflation that's so hard for working Americans. So with all due respect to my friend from Pennsylvania, always willing to work with him, but this package is intended to provide more accountability, not more bureaucracy. And with that, I reserve back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you. I hear this about this being a global issue. It is a global issue, but the reason it's a global issue, quick economics lesson, we are still the reserve currency. We also are the largest GDP. We are exporting the inflation to other countries. Let's be clear, the inflation is caused by Joe Biden's reckless big government socialist agenda. And unfortunately, the American people, as well as the world, have to deal with the recklessness.